My game, Far Gone Frontier, is... and it kind of has been for a long time. Maybe there's a more elegant way to say it, but it's not been in a good state. And I've been half avoiding it and half lying to myself about how bad it really is. I see so many game dev YouTube series that restart their project that at this point, to me, it feels sort of like a trope. Like, oh, how many times did you restart this little guy? But I understand why it happens, especially when you work alone. Every idea turns in this potential pitfall that you don't have to justify to anyone else. And before you know it, your game's got goose guns and a stick that like shoots lasers or something. I don't know. Yeah, that's stupid. I'd never add that. That'd be dumb. Also, to make matters much worse, this is some of the first code I've ever written my whole life. I mean, this is back when I didn't really even know what a loop was and put, literally everything on the process function. You know, like the thing that's called upon, like literally every frame. So I guess what I'm saying is it's time to stop putting stuff off and instead take the knowledge I've gained from doing all these game jams and use it to turn my main project a little more manageable. So yeah, let's do it. Let's fix Far Gone Frontier. I just want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon subs. It's only $5 a month, and I super appreciate the support. I also throw in all the art and all the game files from all the game jams I've ever done. I know they're not the greatest coded projects ever, but if you ever want to see how they worked or even use them as a jumping off point for your game, I 100% support that. Once again, just want to thank you guys so much for the support, and yeah, let's get into this. Okay, everything is going to unravel pretty fast, and I knew that going into this. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, Far Gone Frontier is a little messy, the code's probably not the best. No, it's literally a dumpster fire. Like, it's really bad. It was to the point where after the last game jam I did, I spent an extra month just working on that game because I didn't really feel like going back to Far Gone Frontier. I even had the delusional thoughts of maybe this side project can be my main game for a while, but luckily I grew out of that. I mean, I put so much work into Far Gone Frontier, there's no way I can just walk away. And more importantly, I still believe in the idea of Far Gone Frontier, especially with the inclusion of community stuff. I just need to get to a point where it's a solid base. And with that all said, it was definitely a toss-up between restarting the game or refactoring. I kind of felt like the devil on a shoulder and the angel on the other. And make no mistakes, the devil is definitely restarting. It seems so appealing to have a clean slate, but if I push through the headache that is refactoring, I think in the long term, that'll be worth it. So refactoring it is, and we're gonna start at the very beginning, the main character. The main character has the oldest code. We're talking code completely airlifted from random tutorials online. But you know, we had to start somewhere. And the code in isolation isn't even bad. Instead, it's just how completely stitched together it is with any other tutorial I would find at the time. That and all the half-baked ideas that never made it. I, for some reason, refused to delete any code. I just commented out forever. So like, look at this. I have code for a melee attack in case the character doesn't have a weapon. This wasn't fun. I didn't like this. It was a bad weekend I spent writing all this. But I'm too scared to delete it because who knows? What if I ever wanted it? So instead, you just comment it out and push it over there. Yeah, decision paralysis makes everything go so much slower. But not today. Okay, so when we start over the main character, we're not including any of this garbage. Also, this is a small thing, but the old character had a state machine maintaining what he was doing. I didn't need it. State machine sort of makes sense and maybe a platformer where there's jumping and falling and attacking, but the main character, Billy, he just kind of rolls. There's a roll, and if he rolls, he can't do other stuff. Look at this. We just write this code. If dodging, return. Boom. Yeah, nailed it. No, it's not, this isn't the code. I lied to you. But needless to say, we don't need a state machine. Another big realization that I had from the last game jam is that I need to stop thinking like a developer and more like a player. Depending on what I'm working on, this is going to manifest in different ways, but something I was always missing that is really stupid and embarrassing to admit is that I never use controller support. I'm obviously coding everything on the computer, so when I go to test it, I use keyboard and mouse, but it's come up multiple times now where I want a friend to play test, and they're like, why would I use a keyboard and mouse? And the answer was, I didn't code anything for a controller. Sure, we can change player movement, that's easy, but something like the TNT requires the mouse. Okay, easy enough, let's fix it. Previously, the TNT was tied to the right click, and I was using the function get global mouse position to figure out what direction we were throwing. But now that's kind of out the window. And instead, I redesigned it all with the controller in mind. Initially, you were only throwing TNT in the direction you were running, which is not really that much fun because you end up kind of bombing yourself. But there are things we can do to make this better. The player by default is always looking to where the mouse is, but instead we can recreate that with the right analog stick. And yeah, just like that, we have moving and shooting with different directions with the controller. And you'd be surprised how little things like this make my game feel more like a game. Also, I couldn't help myself. I researched how to add rumble in. In Godot, it's just one line of code, so yeah, you should add that in. Okay, this is great. So the player's finally feeling like they're in a better spot. The code is clean. Well, it's cleaner. It's still me writing it, so it's, it's cleaner. What do you want me to say? With this in a better spot, I can't help but shift my focus onto the glaring issue, which is the main gameplay. On my journey through game dev, I'm always commenting on not only how much there is to learn, but how vast the knowledge pool is for making a video game. Sometimes it feels like you have to be an expert on 30 different topics just to make the smallest project. Between coding, art, and music, it gets overwhelming really quickly. But luckily, there's help out there, like the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest learning community for creatives with thousands of videos covering so many topics from art and animation to even courses on specific game engines, like this little game engine called Godot, you ever heard of that one? Okay, they also have videos on Unreal and Unity as well, all the other great engines. I tend to be a little biased. They really do have classes covering a crazy amount of topics. Because I personally tend to get sucked into game jams often, this class about sparking your creativity immediately stood out to me. Creativity can be one of those aspects of game dev that we almost take for granted. It had me generally reflecting on the types of creative decisions I was making in Far Gone Frontier. For instance, the similar paths we'll take when our brain tries to solve an issue, and how to disrupt those paths enough to sort of get outside the box, which the more we create, the more important it feels to do. And this is just one of so many classes on Skillshare. I really can't wait to jump into some art ones, especially ones focused on animation. I super recommend it. And in fact, the first 500 people to join Skillshare using my link get 1 month free. So you can try it out and see if it's something you like, while also supporting the channel and, learn some stuff. I want to thank Skillshare so much for sponsoring the video. All right, let's get back into it. This might look a little unassuming, but this little thing here, which I've labeled Stump, controls the entire game. Well, or at least it used to at one point. Then I reworked everything, shifted things around, but it never felt simplified, so let me explain what this does. The player would walk up to this little tree stump, and if there were no enemies, you were given the option to sit down. And then this functioned as a menu, allowing the player to push forward, fight waves of enemies, or call upon a shop, or whatever the player was going to be doing. Also, this triggered the black cat spawning, which is my shameless ripoff of the Binding of Isaac's Devil deal. The problem had always been that there are just way too many moving parts that this tree stump is trying to talk to and manage, with maybe the most confusing one being the wave spawner. So instead, we consolidate this all down. And now the tree stump is the wave spawner. This little guy, he makes every enemy in the game. Also, while we're on the wave spawner, one other thing that I changed was how I was handling the placement of enemies. Before, I just had an array of vector 2s, and this is a confusing goddamn nightmare. It is incredibly hard to envision what -2 305 looks like when you're reading code. And that's exactly what it was like when I was spawning enemies. I would look through vector 2s and kind of hope, I think it's around this part of the map. Maybe this is my game jam experience speaking, but the second I opened this code up again, I thought, why is this not just a visual element on the map? I maybe took 30 minutes to do that, and it made the process of spawning enemies way easier to understand. It felt really good, like I was finally making things more scalable. So now, at this point, I start to throw together the basic semblance of a second level. But not because the code is so good that we can move on, but instead, it's because I need to start fresh, so that way I can build the structure of the real game. I'm realizing now that so much of what I was doing in level 1 was me just having fun, just adding anything I wanted, always sort of reassuring myself that I'll scale it down later. But now is later, and it's time to start scaling. So I always knew that level 2 was going to take place in a building, so I put together this tile set. One thing I'm coming to terms with is figuring out when to cut corners and to embrace it. In the past, when doing environment art, I tend to overdo it with all these edge cases on what I need for walls or floors, but my game is really simple. I don't actually need that much. I'm starting to fall into the pattern now where I draw the floor, the top wall, and the left side, and then I just mirror everything else to make it all fit. I mean, when working on games, there's always so much art. Sometimes I have like mental breakdowns just thinking about the idea of drawing multiple bosses. Why get held up here, right? There's so much to do. Let's make the easy stuff easy. And I started to tell myself, you can always go back if you want to, but let's just keep pushing forward. Wait. Do you feel that? Am I in commitment mode right now? Oh my God, guys, I'm so excited. I'm ready to make some big decisions. I'm busting out the graphic paper. It's time to get some work done. I'm at the realization here that everything is too loose. It's time to nail some things down. It's time to give Far Gone Frontier some absolute structure. So I map out how many rooms we're gonna have on each floor, and more importantly, how big are these rooms gonna be? Now, I'm not saying this has to be what we do going forward for every single world, but let's start with some cohesion, and then if it gets boring, we'll spice it up. Right off the bat, I have the main room, which I gotta say is not changing all that much, but one thing I'm doing is locking down how big this room really is and how many doors it has. Currently, the left side will always be the item room, and the right side will always be the challenge room. Then, directly north of the main room will always be the boss room. It seems simple enough, but I just hope it doesn't get too boring. In the old first level, everything was kind of everywhere. And while I knew the rooms needed to be somewhat spread out, there's no rhyme or reason for any of this. This time, instead, I end up just stacking them vertically for the sole purpose of working really friendly with ultra-wide monitors. I'm also pairing that with some camera changes, so now the game is fully playable in ultra-wide. Well, I mean, there isn't like a game yet, but once I make a game, we're ultra-wide covered. Also, behind the scenes here, I'm deleting tons of code that existed on the camera. Simplifying so much of it, it used to have all these functions for every different room. Now, instead, it just cares about the zoom level and the color of the room. But with all of this in place, the game is finally a skeletal structure of what I need it to be. And that's all really exciting. There are still systems that are untouched that I really do need to refresh. Most notably, the enemy system and the weapon system. But for once, I finally have hope that this is a project I can actually finish. I know there can be two minds on this, and your game is never going to be perfect from a coding standpoint. But the peace of mind I'm getting right now, just knowing that this is a project I can keep working on, that alone is easily worth like the couple weeks I spent doing this. If you're like me and you started doing game dev before you were really probably ready, my advice is definitely it's okay to go back, and sometimes you probably should. If the idea of just opening your project gives you anxiety, it's probably a good idea to fix whatever that anxiety is instead of just building on it. And me taking all this time to make these crazy weapons, even though they came out really well, it was kind of building on that anxiety. Thinking the whole time, is this really worth it when the game's on such shaky ground? And coming from my background, game jams really really never taught you that. It was always just get it out the door, make sure it's playable, make sure it has audio. And having that due date just meant I didn't really care what it looked like, it just needed to get done. But for main projects, you have to live with them. You have to open them up day after day. But now slowly, I'm starting to feel better about it. And I think that's good. So wish me luck. The plan now is to finish up a lot of these reworks just behind the scenes. And for the next update, I'll focus more on adding content to the game. I'll have more art to show and focus more on the fun stuff. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.